Welcome back. As global markets face heightened volatility and trade tensions, job security is under increasing pressure, affecting wages, workforce stability and overall economic stability across the continent. Workers in vulnerable sectors are feeling the impact, most making the need for stronger employment protections urgent. To explore these challenges and potential solutions, we're joined by Economist Nthabiseng Moleko from the Stellenbosch Business School. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Nthabiseng. Let's actually first start off with the direct, because I mean, obviously the tariff landscape has now made things much more difficult and complex. So let's talk about the direct impact of the tariffs on South Africa's economy. Of course, it will affect different industries in different ways. What's the level of concentration of women in the sectors that are more vulnerable to this hit?
Thank you so much for having me, and a very good afternoon. Listen, we know that the first thing you need to look at is the export-oriented sectors. So the export sectors that have a high concentration of women in those subsectors, you know that agriculture in the main, informality, with the labor force survey shows us that there is a high concentration of women within the informal sectors, and particularly why agriculture as a subsector is because of the high composition of agriculture in our economy, but also because of the high incidence of women, particularly in the seasonal work, in the informal work, in the picking, and in the different subsectors, the citrus fruit growing, the nuts. And you'll also find that in manufacturing, that's the second, probably one of the sectors that'll be hardest hit. Your minerals exports will be hard hit, titanium, your platinum group metals, and across the board, you'll find that there are, I would say, multiply effects on the supply side, on the value chain of SMMEs and companies that are producers that supply inputs into these subsectors. So your logistics that supply, whether it's trucking or whether it's movement of these goods and services, the storage facilities, these are the warehouses along the value chain of all these subsectors will be affected. Inputs that go into these are fuel. So your oil and gas industries will be directly affected because they're complementary to all these subsectors. So I think if you look carefully at the direct impact, you'll find that there's export-oriented sectors that are in the minerals, that are in the agriculture, that are in auto, particularly auto sector in the manufacturing. But all of these are high concentration of exported goods to the US markets, to the global north, which is the European markets, and also China. But we will feel the hardest hit in terms of the increase in prices from these tariffs in these subsectors.
I mean, it's quite interesting that you highlight also the informal area of that labor landscape, because a lot of the time we just tend to assess the formal sector, not actually go into the informal areas of the ecosystem. You talk about a concept, a very interesting concept of casualization of work in Africa. Just drill into that concept for me, and if then this will exacerbate that issue.
So where does it come from? Casualization of work is not just a concept that is a casual term. It actually emanates from an issue of the type of policies that we have embarked on to do what we call ease of doing business, or to make labor markets more flexible, or to what we call rigidity and reduce the rigidity of the labor market. What that basically means is let's ease up business, let's ease up the manner in which business is done, let's reduce the constraints, and businesses call it red tape. But what it actually amounts to is the casualization of work. What does this mean? It means that contractual work for and permanent work for employees is reduced. It means that the prohibitions, or what you call regulatory frameworks to dismissals, is made more lax, is made less rigid. The conditionality around terminations. You also find that benefits such as maternity, paternal benefits for fathers, care work, all of these issues, pensions that are normally attributed to not just your type of work, but permanent work is reduced because now firms are going towards contractual work, shorter term periods, and even outsourcing key components of work that would be employer-employee relationships to third parties through labor broking. This casualizes work. This reduces benefits for workers. This makes them more vulnerable. And the labor market regulatory framework that has been liberalized as a result of actually decreasing productivity. It has adverse outcomes from a social cohesion perspective, and actually it widens inequality because surpluses that are garnered through profits, but also through increased revenue generation, are not shared to the working class, but they're concentrated in the top one or the top elite, which is your execs and directors and so forth, shareholders, at the expense of maybe the productive working force. And that has a direct effect on the quality of livelihoods of the majority. So I think you've got to look at the systems to adequately compensate everyone, and to look at trying to reduce that Gini coefficient, but also the median worker and the top income decile workers. That median and that difference in inequality has to be minimized, not at the expense of productivity, but for the sake of actually enhancing productivity. And I think we need a rewiring of our mindsets, because we seem to think that this is beneficial, but the evidence that we are seeing is that this actually is not good for growth.
And just lastly, I mean, I think we have about a minute. It's quite sobering to note that this casualization of work is actually a result of policy decisions. So then what are the immediate sustainable solutions then that are available to the South African government in protecting the most vulnerable in terms of employment security?
So the first is, obviously you do have labor protection mechanisms, but the question is, to what extent are you going to employ? You've got your Basic Conditions of Employment Act, you've got regulations around how to set up collective bargaining, you've got a very clear framework on labor in terms of how to conduct, whether it's strikes and so forth. But the issue is really, I think the mindset changes. How do we ensure that both your non-wage benefits, right, for employees are widened? Right, so you've got to look at non-wage benefits are things that look at the condition of work, that look at beyond salaries, that look at the coverage of pensions. So let's look at a very practical thing. If the government was to say, we have 1.1 million domestic workers in our homes, private households, everyone, if watching this, probably has a domestic worker. How many of us have pensions for our domestic workers, right? Why do you not have a product for people with low income earning amounts? Retirement annuities are suited only really for wage workers who are at a certain level of income. So does that mean when the 1.1 million start to exit and retire, they're going to be reliant on the state? So if the state was to start looking at, from a policy position, and the financial sector, together with your pension funds and your insurance funds, ways they can create insurance products, they can create what we call when you die, all of those type of short-term insurance products for themselves. But why don't we look at retirement products that take in small incremental incomes where median salaries are quite low, but they're above minimum wage or around minimum wage for seasonal workers, for domestic workers, and try to absorb those? That's a policy that is required, but also you need to work in tandem with the financial sector and with your financial intermediaries to create appropriate products so that you can actually help all of the population and not just wage workers who are at a certain level of income and only professionals. So I think this is just one intervention that could adjust policies to ensure that those that are in the net, that is at the vulnerable, in the vulnerable population, are actually taken care of. And it's possible, it can be done. It just requires will and willingness from the private sector to create those instruments. And there's profits to be made, but I think that you have to have a balance of the type of products you have for the benefit of the population.
Well, indeed, a very, very insightful conversation and insights there. Thank you so much for your time there, Dr. Nthabiseng. Really appreciate it. That was Nthabiseng Moleko, economist from Stellenbosch Business School.